Do you know what you get if you put conservatives and inequality into Google? Brings up 4.8 million references. And right at the top, there's a quote from a leading right-wing thinker, which said, "Inequality in itself never can be, nor should be, a conservative goal." Well, surprise, surprise. It's why when David Cameron talks about tackling inequality and caring for the poor, I just don't believe him. Have we forgotten that one of the Tories' worst legacies of the 80s and 90s was the massive inequality in Britain? Huge numbers of children growing up in poverty, whole parts of society written off on the scrap heap, and entire communities devastated in Wales, Scotland, the north of England, while a small number of people made millions. And they even made their little club at the top even more secure by making it virtually impossible for people from deprived backgrounds to become lawyers, journalists, doctors, and so on. And Labour promised that they would do better. It was a key pledge of theirs in 1997. But what happened? The number of children living in severe poverty has increased since 2004. Wales has half the number of children that Scotland has, but more children living in extreme poverty than Scotland, a higher proportion than anywhere else in the UK. Overall, 26% more middle-class children now go to university than in 1997, which could be a good thing, but only 3% more poorer children. And the richest 10% of households in the UK are 100 times better off than the poorest 10%, 100 times. The wealth of billionaires has tripled over the last 12 years, whilst average incomes have barely changed and the poor have become poorer. And that simply can't be right. Under the Tories, Wales really suffered. Whole communities were jobless. A whole generation of children was brought up with no expectations and no hope of a better future. And in 1997, Labour promised that things could only get better. I'm sure we all remember the theme tune. And we all thought they would, but Labour has really let us down, that we still have 100,000 children living in poverty in Wales. And in fact, there are more children with at least one working parent living in poverty than ever before. Last winter, there were 2,500 excess winter deaths in Wales, thanks to poverty and an inability to keep their homes warm. And to Labour's credit, they've tried to do something about it. They have thrown money at the problem, but it's just not working. And now, as a last resort, they've come up with a really cunning wheeze. They're passing a law to make it illegal for a child to be poor. Banning poverty, whatever next? They might as well ban recession and war. It's still the case in Wales and the UK as a whole that your family background, the place of your birth, your gender and the colour of your skin still massively affect your chances in life, your skills, your opportunities, even the number of years that you're likely to live. And all political parties say that this must be tackled, but when the Tories were in power, it just got worse. And now that Labour's in power, guess what? It's just got worse. Now in the UK, the top 10% of households aged between 55 and 64 each have wealth of more than £1.3 million, whilst the bottom 10% have less than £28,000. There's a huge, huge gulf. Women have higher levels of education than men, but we still earn more than a fifth less. But even more worrying than the effect on the current generation is the impact on future generations. But this is a fixable problem. Internationally, the UK is doing very badly. We have the 7th worst level of inequality in the OECD, with only places like Mexico, Turkey and Poland doing worse. That's because the rest of the OECD is addressing the problem and we simply aren't doing that. And it matters for all of us, because unequal societies are worse for everyone in them, both those at the top and those at the bottom. They have higher crime rates, poorer health throughout the whole of society, higher teenage pregnancy rates, and the list just goes on. But it's also such a huge waste of human talent and potential. Society needs the best and the brightest brains to achieve their potential, no matter what the background they come from. We need the best doctors, judges, and journalists. We particularly need some better journalists. A person... Thought Lambert would like that one. born into a poor family now is more likely to remain poor throughout their adult life than someone who was born 30 years ago, and that is a criminal waste. A baby born in the poorest parts of the UK will die 14 years before a baby born in a richer area. That's a criminal waste. And a bright child from a poor background falls behind a child from a richer background by the age of 7. How can we let this continue? Now is the time for concrete proposals, not just sound bites. So let's get down to brass tacks. Nick Clegg talked yesterday about the importance and value of education. All children must have the chance to fulfil their potential, and schools must have the resources they need to enable this. Tests on preschool children at the age of 3 show that the initially least bright children from the richest fifth of households overtake the initially brightest children from the poorest households between the age of 5 and 10, and it just gets worse from there. We will undo this damage so that we don't waste the potential of millions of children. And so that's why the Liberal Democrats propose a pupil premium, so money follows those pupils who need it the most. As Nick said, schools can then access extra funds for those pupils from deprived backgrounds to help provide extra support like one-to-one tuition, bursaries and extra equipment. It gives those bright children from deprived backgrounds the level playing field that they currently lack. But it's not just the future that we need to tackle through schooling, it's also the present and pervasive poverty that blights communities. We need to tackle the immediate problems of poverty-stricken working families. In 2007, for the first time ever, there were more children living in poverty with a parent in work than with no parent in work. That is completely crazy, an almost inescapable poverty trap. Whole families are chained into poverty, and it doesn't encourage children to think of education and finding work as a route out of poverty. The other day, a constituent came to see me, a full-time nurse, a husband, a father of 2 young kids, and he's worked his entire life since the age of 16. He came to ask for help because he was struggling to make ends meet. But the tragedy was that he had calculated that he would be financially better off if he quit his job. The savings he would make from not having to meet rising fuel costs, not having to pay for childcare, lower tax levels, and suddenly being eligible for new benefits meant that he would actually have more money if he stopped working. He didn't want to stop working, but the system means that it's better for him and his family if he joins the growing number of the unemployed across the country. Now, he is exactly the sort of person we really need to help. And that's why the Lib Dems would change the tax system so that people pay nothing on the first £10,000 that they earn. It would take over 200,000 people in Wales out of paying tax altogether. It would also mean that well over 750,000 people are £700 a year better off. And that would make a serious difference to struggling families, reduce the number of people living in poverty and give more children a better chance in life. It would make work pay and help parents give an example to their children of why it pays to study and work. And it would bring more money into the poorest communities in Wales. Children have been so let down by both the Tories and Labour, with too many living in poverty, getting too few chances at school, and too early in life losing the chance to prove their potential. The Tories created the problem. Labour has just made it worse, and only the Liberal Democrats have the policies and the commitment to make a difference and to ensure that we don't write off another generation to the detriment of us all. Thank you very much.